Well, come to my channel. Today we are going to talk about the human brain, and we are going to cover this topic completely and clearly from the ground up. The human brain is without question the most complex structure in the known universe. It contains approximately 86 billion neurons, nerve cells, and each one of those neurons can form thousands of connections with other neurons. That means the total number of connections in your brain, called synapses, is estimated to be around 100 trillion. To put that into perspective, that is more connections than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. The brain controls everything you do, every thought you think, every movement you make, every emotion you feel, every memory you have, every word you speak, every breath you take. It does all of this simultaneously, continuously, without you even being aware of most of it. By the end of this video, you are going to understand the structure of the brain, what each part does, how brain cells work, and why understanding the brain matters for medicine and everyday life. So let us start from the very beginning and build this up systematically. Overview and basic facts. Before we dive into the anatomy, let me give you some basic facts about the brain that will help frame everything we cover. The adult human brain weighs approximately 1.4 kilograms, about the weight of a small bag of sugar. It sits protected inside the skull, surrounded by three protective membranes called the meninges, the dura mater on the outside, the arachnoid mater in the middle, and the pia mater on the inside closest to the brain tissue itself. Between the arachnoid and pia mater flows a clear fluid called cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. This fluid acts like a cushion, protecting the brain from physical impact, and it also helps remove waste products from brain tissue. The brain receives its blood supply from four major arteries, the two internal carotid arteries and the two vertebral arteries. These join at the base of the brain to form a structure called the circle of Willis, a circular arrangement of arteries that ensures the brain continues to receive blood even if one of the supplying arteries becomes blocked. Despite weighing only about 2% of total body weight, the brain receives approximately 20% of the body's entire blood supply and uses 20% of its oxygen. It is an extraordinarily energy-hungry organ. The brain is made up of two main types of tissue. Gray matter contains the cell bodies of neurons, the actual processing units of the brain. White matter contains the long fibers, called axons, that connect different areas of the brain to each other and to the rest of the nervous system. These axons are coated in a fatty insulating layer called myelin, which gives white matter its characteristic pale color and dramatically speeds up the transmission of electrical signals along the nerve fibers. Now let us look at the overall structure of the brain. The brain can be divided into three major regions: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each of these has distinct structures and functions, and we are going to go through each one careful. The cerebrum. The cerebrum is by far the largest part of the brain. It makes up approximately 85% of the brain's total weight, and it is the part most people picture when they think of the brain, the large wrinkled structure with all the folds and grooves. The surface of the cerebrum is called the cerebral cortex. This is where the gray matter is concentrated, where the neuron cell bodies sit. The cerebral cortex is deeply folded into ridges called gyri and grooves called sulci. This folding is critically important because it dramatically increases the surface area of the cortex, allowing far more neurons to be packed into the limited space inside the skull. If you were to unfold the cerebral cortex and lay it flat, it would cover an area of approximately 2,500 square centimeters, about the size of a pillowcase. The cerebrum is divided down the middle into two halves, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, by a deep groove called the longitudinal fissure. These two hemispheres are connected to each other by a thick band of white matter fibers called the corpus callosum, which allows the two sides of the brain to communicate with each other. Now here is something very important to understand. The left hemisphere controls the right side of the body and the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. This crossing over happens in the brainstem, and it means that damage to the left side of the brain typically causes weakness or problems on the right side of the body and vice versa. This is called contralateral control, and it is one of the most clinically important principles in neurology. Each hemisphere is divided into four lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. Let me go through each one. The frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the largest lobe and it sits at the front of the brain, hence the name. It is responsible for some of our most distinctly human abilities. The frontal lobe is the seat of executive function, our ability to plan ahead, make decisions, solve complex problems, control impulses, and regulate our behavior and emotions. It is also where our personality resides, the characteristics that make us who we are. At the back of the frontal lobe, there is a specialized region called the primary motor cortex, also known as the motor strip. This is the area that controls voluntary movement. Every part of the body has a corresponding region in the motor cortex. Interestingly, the amount of cortex dedicated to each body part is proportional not to the actual size of that body part, but to how precisely we can control it. So the hands and face, which require extremely fine motor control, have disproportionately large representations in the motor cortex compared to the trunk and legs. If you were to draw a map of the body onto the motor cortex, you would get a distorted figure called a homunculus, a tiny person with enormous hands and face and a relatively small trunk and legs. Also in the frontal lobe is Broca's area, found in the left hemisphere in most people, which is responsible for the production of speech. Damage to Broca's area causes a type of difficulty with speech called Broca's aphasia, where the patient understands what is said to them but struggles to produce fluent speech themselves. They speak in short, effortful, telegraphic sentences. The parietal lobe. The parietal lobe sits behind the frontal lobe. At its front edge is the primary somatosensory cortex, the sensory strip, which receives and processes sensory information from the body, including touch, pressure, pain, temperature, and body position. Like the motor cortex, it has a somatotopic map of the body, each body part mapped to a corresponding region of cortex. The parietal lobe is also important for spatial awareness, our sense of where our body is in space and our ability to navigate our environment. Damage to the parietal lobe, particularly the right parietal lobe, can cause a fascinating condition called hemispatial neglect, where the patient completely ignores everything on one side of their environment. They may only eat food from one side of their plate, only shave one side of their face, or draw only one half of a clock face, not because they cannot see the other side, but because their brain is simply not processing that side of space. The temporal lobe. The temporal lobe sits on the side of the brain, roughly where the temples are. It is primarily responsible for hearing and language comprehension. The primary auditory cortex processes the sounds we hear. Wernicke's area, located in the left temporal lobe in most people, is responsible for understanding language. Damage to Wernicke's area causes Wernicke's aphasia, where the patient can produce fluent speech, but it is filled with errors and made-up words, and they cannot understand what is said to them. Unlike Broca's aphasia, where the patient speaks slowly and with effort, a patient with Wernicke's aphasia speaks easily and at normal speed, but what they say makes no sense. The temporal lobe also plays a critical role in memory, particularly through a structure called the hippocampus, which lies deep within the temporal lobe. The hippocampus is essential for the formation of new memories. Famous cases in neuroscience, like the patient known as HM who had both hippocampi surgically removed, showed that without the hippocampus, a person cannot form any new long-term memories. They live permanently in the present moment, unable to remember anything that happened more than a few minutes ago. The occipital lobe. The occipital lobe sits at the very back of the brain and is dedicated almost entirely to visual processing. The primary visual cortex receives raw visual information from the eyes via the optic nerves and optic tracts and surrounding areas, process that information further, identifying shapes, colors, movement, and faces. Damage to the occipital lobe can cause a range of fascinating visual disturbances. A person can become cortically blind, unable to see despite having perfectly healthy eyes, because the visual cortex is destroyed. Or they can lose the ability to recognize faces a condition called prosopagnosia, while still being able to see perfectly clearly. Thank you for watching Biology Explained Clearly. I hope this video helped you understand the amazing world of the brain a little better. If you enjoyed this explanation and want more easy-to-understand biology and neuroscience content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments which part of the brain you'd like us to explain next. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next lesson on Biology Explained Clearly.